Long ago, the Maori people set sail from far-off Polynesia, cruising to New Zealand in their trusty canoes. But why did they leave? What adventures did they face on the open sea? Once they arrived, things got interesting. They built a society full of secrets, including a warrior culture that struck fear into the hearts of many. These warriors weren't your average fighters. No, they were big, tattooed, and downright intimidating. Are the cannibalism rumors about the Maori Warriors true? What made them so terrifying? Was it just their appearance, or was there something more? Let's discover the 9 most horrifying facts about the Maori Warriors. Starting with their intimidating tattoos. See, tattoos meant a lot to the Maori people, and guess what? Both guys and gals rocked them. Face tattoos were super common, but some daring Maori went all out, decorating their necks, chest, and arms too. Most of them started this ink thing during their teenage years. Now, these weren't your run-of-the-mill tattoos. They were special. Each design was one of a kind, usually featuring spirals. And yes, getting inked was a big deal. It was a whole ceremony, and every line etched into the skin showed off the person's guts and grit. So they used something other than fancy machines like today. No, they carved those designs into the skin using old-school tools, a mallet and a chisel made from bone. And the ink? It was a mix of ash and fat. So instead of smooth skin, these tattoos left behind grooves, like a record. Now that's what is called leaving a mark. But what's the deal with the whole debate about whether Maori warriors were into cannibalism? So the next horrifying facts were stories from people who saw it happen, stories passed down the Maori families, and even stuff dug up by archaeologists that suggest it did happen. So why would they do such a thing? Well, it wasn't because they were hungry. One idea is they wanted to take in the spirit of the person they ate, something they called mana. Others say it was just their way of dealing with all that anger after a battle. And then there's the idea that it was a way to scare off their enemies. They believed that turning their foes into waste after eating them was the ultimate insult. Insane, right? So another thing that freaked the opponents out was the Maori warriors' use of weapons. Have you ever heard of a go-to weapon for Maori warriors, the Mir Club? Shaped like a teardrop and crafted from bone, jade, or stone, these clubs were more than just tools. They were prized possessions passed down through generations. In a fight, they weren't messing around. These clubs were all about close combat. A warrior would aim for the shoulder, aiming to break bones or delicate joints, leaving their opponent vulnerable. Then, it was a swift strike to the head, often targeting the temple. Why? Because right behind it is the Tarian, the weakest part of the skull. One solid hit there could end the battle with just one blow. The following horrifying fact about these warriors is that they had a unique way of saying goodbye to their loved ones. It all started way back in their history. First, they would wrap the body in mats and bury it after a week or two of grieving. Over time, the body would break down, but that wasn't the end of it. A year later, they'd dig up the bones and clean off any leftover flesh. Then, they'd paint the bones with red ochre, a natural dye, and take them to different places for more mourning. After another ceremony, they'd bury the bones again in a special spot. Once this was done, they believed the person's spirit could move on to whatever came next. Be the first to know about our upcoming content. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now let's proceed with another terrifying fact. Why did Maori warriors care so much about heads? And what's up with them taking the heads of their defeated enemies? Once they had one, they'd get rid of the brain and eyes, seal up all the openings, and then cook it up, either by boiling or steaming. After that, they'd let it dry in the sun for a while, and then give it a nice rub down with shark oil. Now, why go through all that trouble? Well, one reason was to taunt their enemies. In a chilling account, a missionary recounted witnessing a Maori chief taunting the head of an enemy chief, saying, "You wanted to run away, didn't you? But my greenstone club overtook you. And after you were cooked, you were made food for me. And where is your father? He is cooked. And where is your brother? He is eaten. And where is your wife? There she sits, a wife for me. And where are your children?" There they are, loads on their backs carrying food as my slaves. As if that wasn't rude already, they came up with a really weird game involving the heads. They'd stack them up in a pile, with the head of the top chief right at the top. Then they'd take turns throwing stones or other heads, trying to knock off the top head from the pile. Infanticide, which the Maoris also practice, ranks among one of the most horrifying things in general. Sadly, baby girls were often the victims because tribes wanted more boys. See, every guy was expected to be a fighter, so they needed a good number of them for protection. Plus, since guys were more likely to die in battles, there weren't as many later on. If a baby had any issues, they might be murdered too. Now, here's the grim part. There were 5 ways they'd do it. They might crush their skulls, drown them, strangle them, suffocate them, or even press on their soft skull spot to end things fast. But hey, we warned you. The Maoris did some horrifying things. Did you know that in Maori culture, a war group known as a hapu usually had around 100 fighters, sometimes including women? When several have teamed up, they got stronger but less organized. Starting from a young age, every guy trained to be a warrior. They focused on building wrist strength to wield weapons like the mirror. Their attack strategy was sneaky. They'd quietly approach enemy settlements or pretend to be hunting. Then when they got close, they'd strike, usually at dawn. They made sure to take out all the men to stop any revenge attempts. And as a bonus, they'd capture the women as spoils of war. The next creepy fact is a bit less grim than the ones before. One of the traditions of the Maori Warriors, still used by many of their national sports teams today, is the Hakka dance. In this dance, they chant, stomp their feet, stick out their tongues, and pop their eyes. While it's often done to greet important guests, its origins lie in war. They use the Hakka in 2 main ways. First off, it was a way to scare their enemies senseless, but it also had a deeper purpose. It was performed before battle as a ritual. If anything went wrong with the dance, the elders saw it as a bad sign. This gave them a chance to rethink their plans or make changes if needed. And finally, what lots of people find the most horrifying of all is their trend of collecting tattooed Maori heads that came up in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Sadly, this led to many Maoris being murdered just to supply this demand. The Maori people in New Zealand had this tradition of tattooing their heads and sometimes their buttocks too. As we already mentioned, they'd use chisels to carve designs into the skin and then rub ink into it. This process left permanent grooves in the skin, giving them a fierce look. Each tattoo had its unique design, showing off the wearer's family history and social status. If a chief passed away, they'd take off their tattooed head and keep it as a precious keepsake. It was a way to honor and remember them. Europeans thought these tattooed heads were pretty interesting, so they started trading with the Maori for them, giving firearms in exchange. But then, things took a dark turn. The Maori began trading the heads of their enemies, but when there weren't enough to go around, some guys were murdered just for their tattoos. It even got to the point where slaves were tattooed just so their heads could be sold. Hey people, are you satisfied with our content? Your feedback is important, so share your thoughts in the comments below.